In verse 20, after they get out, after they have that blessing, we're promised that God is going to repopulate the whole earth through the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Noah, who was a man of the soil. So we didn't know that about Noah, did we?
Not really.
Yeah, we're not really told what he did for a living, but apparently he was a bit of a farmer. He plants a vineyard. He drinks some of the wine and gets drunk. And he lay uncovered in his tent.
Must have been hot.
Yeah, we're back to the Garden of Eden, right? He's naked. Yep. What's going to happen when there's fruit everywhere and he's naked?
Gonna get a sunburn.
Yeah, of more ways than one. So Ham, the father of Canaan, he sees his nakedness. Very much like Adam and Eve were able to see each other, right? And told his two brothers outside. So he reveals his father's shame to his brothers. Shem and Japheth took a garment, they lay it back both on their shoulders and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, they did not see his nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, lowest of slaves shall he be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed by the Lord my God be Shem, and let Canaan be his slave. May God make space for Japheth, and let him live in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his slave." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. Lots to cover there. So, first thing, the drunkenness that leads to the nakedness. What do you think Ham did? So the reason this gets picky, and we should say to parents, if you're listening with your children, this is a good time to save the rest of this until they are not with you. Just because we're not going to get graphic. Minister Joe and I don't use foul language or anything, but it's pretty difficult subject material. So, and I want to be able to treat it frankly. So we'll pause here, Minister Joe, for a few seconds. Now the rest is on you. We gave you fair warning. So the language of seeing another person's nakedness is often used in the scripture, that phraseology, for when a man and woman have intercourse. So that has led some to believe that Canaan did something inappropriate to his father while he was in his inebriated state. So Ham did. Some people believe that that might be at stake and might account for Noah's extreme response. That's possible. The other possibility is, of course, that the uncovering of nakedness is considered shameful after the eating from the tree. It's vulnerability. It's an inability to protect oneself. It's things that are reserved only for the most trusted relationships, which is why it's reserved for marriage, because of the trust implicit there. It's dangerous to be exposed. And people have always known this. Jesus was most likely crucified naked on the cross. I shouldn't say most likely. He was most certainly crucified that way because that was what the Romans did. They wanted to shame people. And we might think of nakedness as alluring in our culture, but it's not alluring to the person. It might be alluring to the spectators, but that's exactly the problem. It's complete exposure is very unsafe in our world, from the elements, from animals, and from other people. So the exposing of nakedness is something that the ancient Near East believed needed to be guarded. And so if you were to discover someone who, because of doing something foolish, ended up in a very compromising position, you would help them in their dignity by not exposing it, but by covering it. So that is essentially, no matter what you think Ham did to Noah, in the ancient Near East, simply telling other people about it and not helping his father to hide his shame would have been a huge breach of trust. So it might have been worse than that, but it was at least that.
Yeah.
And Shem and Japheth don't do that. They cover their father's nakedness. This is not to say that you shouldn't turn someone in who does something illegal. Like I've heard some people use this as justification. I'm actually saddened to say who I heard this from, so I'm not going to. But I've heard people in positions you would not expect this from to say that families should keep some of the misbehavior of each other secret because of this passage, that it shouldn't be exposed. I don't think that's what we're talking about at all. Criminal behavior in Israel was punishable and was meant to be exposed. So you can't overread this. But there is a sense in which if you can protect somebody's dignity, you should. And even when someone has to be judged, there's no reason to put them in the stocks. Cast your pearls before swine, as Jesus said about judgment in Matthew. So there is a sense here of Ham's. I don't know what you think. I don't know if you think he molested his father or if he simply shared his shame. Either way, it's a despicable act, and Noah doesn't take kindly to it.
Yeah, I've always seen it as dishonor.
Yeah.
He dishonored him.
Yeah, I mean, I had a Hebrew professor who would just probably want me whipped with 40 lashes if I didn't admit that the language sounded sexual. And it does. In Hebrew, the language sounds sexual. So I would not be doing due diligence if I didn't say that. But whether it was or it wasn't, the shame in that culture would have been equivalent almost.
Yeah, I have a hard time believing he had sexual relations with him. But
yeah.
But if that's what the Hebrews were saying, there. There's other implication that people have tried to associate him with as racist. And this was often used to talk about racism.
Yeah, let's be honest though. There is no way to trace where all these people go.
Yeah. Ridiculous.
There's just no way to trace that. So when we go through the genealogies, you'll get a few senses. Like obviously Ham's descendants by Canaan don't go, they go to the Middle East. They end up in the land of Canaan.
Yeah.
So this idea that Ham's descendants go to Africa, which I know people in the early colonies that were trying to justify slavery and things, Canaan goes to Canaan.
Right.
He doesn't go to Africa.
Right.
Like his descendants are in Canaan.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even get that. But he does have a son. I think Cush is one of his children, Ham's children. I think so. Mm-hmm. And the Cushites are from modern day Ethiopia. So some of his descendants go there, but not the cursed ones. Right. The cursed ones go, can we say it again? To Canaan. I don't understand. I don't understand the point.
And it's Noah who's cursing him. It's not like it's God.
Yeah, and Noah is not cursing Ham, but Canaan. And that seems unfair, I'm sure, because Canaan didn't do anything. Ham did. But this is mercy on Noah's part because he's not going to curse Ham's entire line. He's just going to curse one of his sons. And Canaan doesn't even look to be the eldest son. So that's mercy on Noah to curse just one of Ham's sons. That's merciful. He could have cursed the whole line, but that would have been devastating because that would be a third of the earth,
right,
which he doesn't do. So in any case, Canaan is the one who's cursed. And his descendants, this does get carried out in real life because the Canaanites eventually are defeated by the Israelites, mm-hmm. and they eventually do become servants of Israel. So this is carried out in real life. There's no reason to look for any other explanation than what happens with the Canaanites in Israel. And it's years and years later. God gives the Canaanites 450 years to repent, mm-hmm. which they don't do. And even when Israel comes in, the Canaanites are welcomed to convert to Judaism, to convert to the Israelite religion.
Mm-hmm.
They're only destroyed if they refuse that. So again, it's a different culture, and I understand it's hard for people no matter how we place it, but let's just be fair that hunting around for where the descendants of Japheth went, where the descendants of Shem went, and where the descendants of Ham went, we don't have enough real information for that.
Yeah.
They seem to go in all different directions. I don't think we could ever discover a pure lineage of any of these three today.
That's not even mentioned, so I don't know why.
Later on in chapter 10, there's going to be some descendants. So like in 10 verse 6, it says the descendants of Ham are Cush, which is modern day Ethiopia, is where the Cushites end up. Egypt, which is, we know where Egypt is, but Egypt is one of the sons of Ham. That's where the name is associated. Put and Canaan. And Canaan, the Canaanites end up in Canaan, like where they're named. They end up in the Middle East. But before, modern day Middle Eastern people are more recent. We're talking about people who are from Arab descent and people who are from Persian descent, and now some from European descent who live there, and certainly some from African descent. But in the days of Genesis, the Canaanites lived there. And the Canaanites don't live there anymore. So we don't even know what the Canaanites would have looked like or anything. So again, doing all that stuff is just ridiculous. Yeah, it's ridiculous. But, people find a way to justify anything they want by finding their favorite text for it.
Yeah. What does it say about Noah, though? Let me ask you a question since you've been asking all the questions.
Yeah.
What does it say about Noah and the whole idea of a man of the soil proceeded to plant a vineyard? All this takes time. It's not like it's like 5 minutes. Boom, you got grapes. You make grapes and you make wine out of it, especially intoxicating, because that's what we assumed he was drunk.
Yep.
Became drunk and laid in guard. All this takes time. We're almost talking realistically. It might be a year or 2 years before this could actually happen.
Yeah. And
so what does it say about Noah and why he's drunk? Why is it important that he's drunk?
It is a crazy question, right? The movie that I've alluded to several times with Russell Crowe suggested that Noah was so traumatized by the event of losing every life on earth that he becomes somewhat of an alcoholic.
Mm.
He's kind of drowning his sorrows. Another option that people have talked to me about is that after the flood with all those bodies and all the decay, that there might have been a bacterial bloom, that perhaps grapes didn't ferment quite before the flood as they did after the flood. And he might have inadvertently gotten drunk by drinking grape juice and not realizing the process that was occurring. But that one seems tough for me because grapes don't turn into wine naturally. They turn into vinegar or even something worse. They rot. To get alcohol, you have to control that process. So I find it unlikely that it was accidental, but maybe it was. I don't know. If you make grape juice, you leave it in your fridge long enough or you just leave it out because they wouldn't have refrigerators long enough, will it turn into something that has enough content of alcohol to make you drunk? Maybe it will. I don't know enough about it. But that's another option I've been given, that maybe it was accidental. Maybe he didn't realize how quickly things would ferment after the flood. So I've been told that.
Yeah, that seems unlikely though, doesn't it?
It seems unlikely to me, but if you want to defend Noah, it's probably the best way to do it.
Well, he probably didn't have any problem with it. That's what I'm trying to get to. It seemed like he didn't really have a problem with it.
Yeah, the drunkenness itself does not seem to be the problem here. It's what he does while drunk.
Mm-hmm.
that he whatever it means to expose his nakedness, because that can be a Hebrew euphemism for doing something very embarrassing. So he may not just have laid naked in his tent. It might be that he did something he shouldn't have done. And maybe Canaan participated with him or saw him do it and tried to expose it to his brothers. So, you don't know what's at stake here. But because I'm a human,
Mm-hmm.
and I know how I deal with stress, that reading, I never thought of it until I saw that movie. And the movie's not inspired, obviously, but I never considered just how traumatic
Mm-hmm.
the flood must have been on Noah. And I'd never considered that possibly he carried some scars from it. So that's an interesting thought. The third is that drinking was a type of celebration in Israel, always was. Matter of fact, the word for rejoice in Hebrew is the same as the word for drink. And most Jewish festivals involve wine. One of them that's way later, Purim, even involves drunkenness. So it's also possible that Noah was just celebrating, but because he was drunk, he ended up doing something shameful. So it's possible the drunkenness is not the moral issue here, but simply what he did. I know that there's a standing in, I don't know how many Jewish people carry this belief, but I know at least one does, because I read it on the blog of a rabbi trying to explain why they get drunk at Purim. Because getting drunk at Purim is part of the ceremony. So he said that there is a belief in Judaism, and like I said, I don't know how widespread. This is one rabbi that I read, but he said that it revealed that what you do when drunk reveals who you really are. That if you are law-abiding when drunk, then you are truly law-abiding. But if you break the law while drunk, then you're truly a lawbreaker. And so getting drunk is a revelation of one's true character. There's an old Latin saying that rings along those lines, right? In vino veritas, in wine truth. So there is that. Now, of course, the Bible pushes against that. But at least Paul does. He says, be not drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit. And he lists drunkenness as part of the fleshliness consistently. But I've heard that too. All that is to say that it's possible that Noah was celebrating the harvest of these grapes, or just at some sort of celebration. We're not told. But whatever happens, he does something shameful that his son exposes. And for that, Noah curses him.
Right.
But not his whole family line, just one of his children, which is, I know, stinks to be Canaan in that way, but it was a blessing not to curse the entire family.
Yeah, so Noah's the one who really did something wrong.
Noah does something wrong. His nakedness is revealed.
Mm-hmm.
So Noah does do something he shouldn't have done. We don't know what it was. Ham's sin is that he exposes it. Or maybe he participated with him. That's where that sexual connotation may be there in the language. It may not be sexual. It may just be trying to imply that Ham and Noah both fell in this way, but it was Ham who exposed Noah. So whatever they did, they might have done together. That's possible. The language is indicating that. But and it doesn't have to be sexual. Like I said, it has to be shameful.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he ate blood. Maybe he ate an animal that had its blood in it. We've already have a number of things that he could have done that would have been considered shameful. So we don't know what it was, but it's quite possible Ham participated somehow in it. And what's very clear is that Ham is the one who reveals it to his brothers.
Now the nakedness, do you recall from the Hebrew from when the Adam and Eve found or said that they were naked? Is the same word used?
I don't know.
Do you think?
So the nakedness, the word there is erva. So let me see what it is for Adam and Eve. Let's see.
Because in the garden, the nakedness was revealed when they had the knowledge of when they have eaten of the tree.
Yeah, it's not the same form of the word, but it looks to me like they're related. In Genesis, it's the word erome. So it's I think it's the same root. I'd have to do some research to be sure, but those roots look related to me, but it's not the same form. It's not an exact quote, if that's what you were asking.
Yeah, I wonder how similar it might be to reflect the kind of knowledge of the knowledge that comes along with.
I would say it's the same root, though. I think it's going to be ein resh he. So I think they're definitely related. Somebody who's a Hebrew scholar who's ever researched this, you could tell me if you agree with me, but it looks to me like it's the same root.
I'm sure we got a few followers doing that.
Yeah. You never know.
Yeah.
You never know. So, yeah.
I can't say that I've ever really or wanted to really think about what exactly they might have been participating in.
No, I think that is obscured by the language. I don't think we're intended to know.
Yeah, I think people would kind of OCD on that probably.
Yeah. But the point is here that rather than covering his father's nakedness, and that could be done in any number of ways. If seeing his nakedness implies seeing him doing something that he shouldn't have been doing, that's deeply humiliating for him, which probably is what happened. They should have helped him. Like Ham should have helped him. Mm-hmm. But instead, he told on him. This is where some people will get in and say, well, families shouldn't betray secrets. We're not talking about illegal behaviors. I mean, there's very few illegal behaviors here. I mean, even though they were told they shouldn't eat meat with blood in it, there's no penalty for doing it. They're just told not to do it. The only thing he could have done that would have had a penalty in these days was murder somebody. And he clearly didn't do that.
Right.
So we're not talking about criminal behavior here, but we're talking about shameful behavior.
Yeah, and I mean, God is the one who said, who told you were naked?
Yeah.
And the curse here is coming from Noah. I don't see the difference or see the same effectiveness of Noah cursing as opposed to God cursing.
Yeah, Noah is the one who makes this pronouncement. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what are you thinking in response to that? I'll say this, from this point on, humans are the ones who make the blessings and the curses for their children. You'll see Abraham do it with Isaac and Ishmael. You'll see Isaac do it with Jacob and Esau. You'll see Jacob do it with Joseph and Judah and the rest of his brothers, the rest of his sons. So this is the beginning of a pattern that is going to continue, where it's the father that passes on or doesn't blessing to his children. So it's unprecedented, I guess, to this point in Genesis, but it's going to become a pattern. But it is interesting that when Adam and Eve's nakedness was revealed, God brought a curse. But when Noah's nakedness is revealed, he speaks the curse. How are you processing that? I don't know what to make of that other than just to observe it.
Well, it's like, if I can do this, just kind of play out loud here.
Yeah, that's what this is for.
So if you have Adam and Eve, and they sin, they disobey, they eat of the fruit. They recognize that they're naked, and they hide. And God says, "Who told you were naked?" Like as if God couldn't tell that they were naked. But here we have, like, if Noah is compared to Adam and Eve, he's done something that's shameful. We don't know
Yeah.
exactly what that is, but here he is. He's naked. If there's a parallel there, and his son finds his nakedness, there's something about that's being revealed.
Yep.
About Noah's character. I think it points back to the inclination of evil.
So you see this, what Noah does here, as problematic.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. And I mean, if your son walked in on you in the bathroom,
yeah,
and you're going to the bathroom, and that's a humiliating place to be in. Are you going to curse your son?
Yeah, it has to be worse than that, right?
Well, just the very thought of what that implies. It might be your youngest son, or so. So I'm trying to understand why Noah would do this if it was so bad.
Yeah, this is why the language being so graphic and seem to be underlaid with sexual connotation, at least whatever you think happened, it's pretty bad what Ham does when Noah is found in this space. There's definitely indication in the text that whatever Noah was doing, that was shameful. What Ham did was way worse and took advantage of him.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know what that was. But you're right. If it's just a matter of Ham kind of pointing at his dad and laughing, it seems like a disproportionate thing. But you pointed out that we're in the Ten Commandments most of the time early in Genesis, right?
Yeah.
Is the dishonoring of one's father a light crime?
No, it's the Ten Commandments. But one of the commandments, it says that the second part, obviously, is the promise that all will go well with you, and your days will be long. Isn't that correct?
And Canaan is cursed exactly the opposite because of the dishonor. He is going to have a difficult life, and he's going to be a servant of his brothers rather than a ruler.
Yeah.
So the dishonoring of his father leads to a curse.
So that's why I said in the beginning I've always seen it as dishonor.
Yeah.
I associate it with that.
Yeah.
Actually, that's what I shared a little bit.
I have never. I agree with you that there's a way of reading this that sounds like Noah might have overreacted. But what I'm wrestling with is that in the tradition of interpretation, both Jewish and Christian, he's always been defended. And for various reasons. I tend to think, though, that the dishonoring of one's parent is much more serious in the scriptures than it is to us. And I think if he had cursed Ham, that would have been devastatingly overreaching, because Ham is going to be a third of the people on earth. But by cursing one of his lesser sons, I know we would never do that, but I think there's a sense of justice here, that Noah thinks that this is just. Now, he may or may not be right, but this curse is going to play out in Genesis in real time.
Yeah. Or it could be a way to try to interpret the reactions, or, I mean, thinking back from a Moses perspective of the reality of the rejection of God's law from those who live in Canaan.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're going here, but I resist the idea that this curse was put in Noah's mouth by Moses because of what eventually happened. You could read it that way, and of course, if it was written by humans, that's would be a very legitimate and maybe even a likely interpretation. But I would prefer to see what happens with Canaan as a consequence of this rather than the cause of it. But I have some resistance to Moses reworking the story because of what he knew eventually resulted. But that would be an easy thing to say.
It could be.
He singled out Canaan because the Canaanites were the land that God was going to supplant.
Mm-hmm.
But that does take away a bit from the story of Noah. It makes it a subservient justification for later behavior of Israel and not something that was truly historical.
Yeah.
And you know me, I think they're historical.
Yeah, I do too. And it's in there for a reason. And there's no getting around that. But to say that to reflect like Moses would be able to look back and say, yeah, this is dishonoring, and it follows along with that law that each generation, that it might go well with you in each generation to follow.
Yeah.
Obviously there's that whole thing. I mean, it's a following from Cain.
Right.
Continuation of Cain, of dishonor your parents.
And let me say this, I guess I'm still kind of stuck on the way that some of our ancestors used these verses to justify treating people of other races disrespectfully and sometimes even violently and enslaving them. I still want to point out that there's one man in Genesis who ends up being the founder of just about every major city that ever becomes anything. And he is called a mighty warrior. And he is a great hunter. And his name is Nimrod. And he is a descendant of Cush, who goes to Africa.
Who's a descendant of Ham.
A descendant of Ham. But he's a mighty warrior before the Lord. He walks with God. So stick that in the craw of our ancestors. Before you interpret the scriptures, try reading them.
There you go.
But he walked with the Lord. Like, he was called a mighty hunter before the Lord.
Yeah.
He's associated with God. So, and he's one of Ham's children, one of his descendants, one of Cush's children. The Canaanites he founds Babel, Erech, Akkad. These are the principal cities in the land of Shinar, which ends up being the foundation of the empire from which Abraham is called, the Sumerian Empire. And Babel, of course, becomes Babylon. So the guy's significant, and he walks with God. So we'll leave it at that. But Canaan becomes the father of Sidon, Heth, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Arkites, the Sinites, the Arvadites, the Zemarites, and the Hamathites. And they spread abroad. Their territory extends from Sidon, which is one of the cities on the coast of the Mediterranean, in the direction of Gerar as far as Gaza. Now we're going down the coast of what's considered Israel today, or the Gaza Strip. In the direction of Sodom and Gomorrah, that's over near the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. Admah and Zeboim as far as Lasha. These are the descendants. So the Canaanites end up in the Middle East. And they're the ones who are cursed.
Yeah, it just says the lowest of slaves will be his brothers. So to me, I mean, back then, slaves were people sold themselves into slavery. They owed debts.
They did. But to say that slavery as it was practiced in the Americas was particularly abominable because it was based on the idea that the people who were enslaved were less than human.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore did not deserve human rights, nor were they made in the image of God. That kind of slavery was abominable and justified atrocities that were rarely done by nations that had slaves. But that's not to say that there were not terrible examples throughout history of the institution of slavery. There certainly are others. in Asia, for instance, where very similar ideologies were present and very similar things were done. So the idea of humans enslaving other humans it goes back as far in every continent where there have been people throughout history. It is everywhere. And it still exists today. Horrible to say. It still exists today in many places. And the ramifications can be felt everywhere. But the kind of slavery that God envisioned in Israel, you have to remember the time where this is part of the economy everywhere, is much muted and much kinder and filled with much greater dignity and never lifelong.
Right.
I mean, a slave could choose to become a lifelong servant.
Right.
But you can see, like and for Abraham, for instance, he had a slave named Eleazar, who was his inheritor, would have inherited his whole estate because he didn't have children. That's a very different setup than what might be common. But to say that slavery used to be better than it was in America, that's probably saying too much. It certainly was horrific in America, and shame on us because it was done by people who claimed to be Christians. It was certainly horrific here, but it's been horrific in other places as well. And today, slavery is about as bad as it's ever been because slavery is mostly for the sex trade and is done to very vulnerable people who are, I mean, it's an abomination. But let's not blame Noah.
Right, or use Noah.
Or use him as some justification that somehow this is okay with God.
We agree on that one for sure.
Yeah. In Christ, there's no slave nor free. Whatever Jesus was, I mean, I think for a lot of people, God is not quick enough in getting rid of these evils that humans bring in. And so there's a lot of frustration, I know, that he doesn't simply abolish the practice in the law of Moses, or that Paul doesn't simply abolish it, even though he clearly preaches against it, like in Philemon, for instance. God is slow in draining the poison from human veins. There's no question. But it's very clear to me, the trajectory of the scriptures, that this is something that will not be in the new heavens and the new earth, and therefore is not part of what God wants. So, however slowly he draws the poison from our veins, it doesn't mean that he justifies the poison he's drawing. He does tend to move us slowly towards righteousness, much too slowly for many people's taste. I understand. Sometimes too slowly for my taste. But I in the end, I trust him because the trajectory he set makes a whole lot of sense to me. Humans have been complaining about God's slowness in accomplishing these things from the beginning. And to us, he does seem slow. But the disciples addressed that. I guess Jesus addressed it in a parable to his disciples when he said that a farmer sowed good seed into his field. And then his enemy came by night and sowed tares among the wheat, weeds. And the servants came the next day and said, "Oh, we have to take up all these weeds." And the father said, "If we tear up the weeds, we'll have to tear up the wheat as well. Let's wait until the harvest, and then we'll separate the wheat from the weeds." There's a principle there that is not true when you garden all the time. So you have to understand Jesus must be saying something else, because we weed our flower gardens all the time.
Yeah, and your vegetable gardens.
And your vegetable gardens. But there probably are situations, maybe farmers would know these situations, where it is dangerous to the crops to actually get the weeds out. Maybe there is such a situation. But Jesus is obviously talking about way more than horticulture.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is more or less explaining to us why he leaves wickedness in the world. And the only way, and our people today are coming wise to this, they're realizing there's no way to fix the system. And so they're thinking all you can do is burn it down. That's exactly what he says in that parable. Like, to get the justice you want for the tares, I'm going to have to destroy the wheat too. There's no way to continue to show mercy to the people of the earth and bring justice at the same time. So God does leave a lot of wickedness in the world, but he insists he's doing it so we have a chance to turn. But we think we can have our cake and eat it too. That we can have justice come and the innocent not suffer for it. But every time God brings judgment, the innocent suffer. In Sodom and Gomorrah, the children died too. Right?
The animals died too.
The animals too.
The animals in the flood.
The flood.
So to me, this is exactly what we're talking about.
Yes. It's exactly the point. So we can be irritated with God that he didn't just set all things right immediately, that he didn't come down to Moses and say, okay, these are all the things you're doing wrong, and these are all ways to set them right. He doesn't do that. Instead, he gives them a law very much written as a law people of that time could have realistically followed.
Mm-hmm.
And he points them in the direction of holiness. But it's not holiness all the way. You can obey the entire law and still be a sinner. Jesus reveals that. Then in Christ, he begins to show us where that law was supposed to lead us. And Jesus tells us a lot more than the law ever did about what the intention of the law was. And we realize, wow, we didn't go in that direction at all. Why didn't God tell us back at Sinai he didn't want us to hate anybody? Well, the point of the law is to move us towards holiness, not to take us all there by light speed. It's not like a transporter. And so Jesus kind of points us further, and then he gives us vision of the new heavens and the new earth where his work will be completed, and we see the trajectory now. And in Christ, there is no slave or free, Jew or Gentile, male or female. All are in Christ. Like these things that define us are gone. So once you see that, you can go back and see how God feels about it. He's never okay with slavery. How do I know? Because there's no slavery in heaven. And what God wants is in the new heavens and the new earth. If it's not there, then he doesn't want it. So you can backtrack yourself to see, so first he's moderating this, and eventually he's getting rid of it. So you have to, following God is sometimes about looking at the end and reading it back into the beginning. You have to do that.
Yeah.
And so, but for us, it's too slow. We would like to see the wicked punished today. We'd like to see the evil wiped out the moment they do evil. And we're never appreciative that if God behaved that way, none of us would be here. The flood would have been absolute. It's because of his promise after the flood that that's not happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then Peter addresses it, right? God is not slow, as some understand slowness, but he's patient with you, willing that none should perish, but all should come to everlasting life. That's 2 Peter 3. But the accusation of being too slow has always been with us. So I know these are hard subjects. I mean, they're very contemporary, but they're very hard, and I'm sure we didn't make everybody feel good about it. But I think that will get us to the Tower of Babel.
Sure.
So we can do that next time. So
Sounds
do you have
like
any final words, Minister Joe? I know I did most of the talking today, but I will say that you instigated me to say some things that are going to get me in trouble.
It's always my fault. I know.
I just need somebody to blame. I'm just, Adam.
You had your head on the chopping block.
Yeah, I put myself there anyway.
Yeah, I would just say be glad that God's mercy is strong. The particulars of Noah in the situation. I think there's some other things that we can learn from that circumstance to avoid. I don't agree that the thing of Purim, that alcohol brings out the best in anyone.
Or brings out the truth.
Yeah, I'll bring out.
It does. I just to defend Purim and what that guy. He didn't say it brings out the best. He said it brings out the truth.
Yeah. Well, we'll call it what they call it in Ant-Man, truth serum.
Yeah.
I don't agree with that. If parents that are alcoholics, that I don't think that does too well for me to hear that experientially. But and I wouldn't endorse that um, um, just because of.
Yeah, and I don't think Paul endorsed it at all.
So the reality of, and then on top of that, I think because I'm a minister of family life, I'd be cautious about cursing your kids.
Yeah.
I'm cursing at them because they tend to copy what we say anyway. So if your parents, you hear that now, I'm really telling you, think about what you say. They'll remember it forever. I think that when you're in pain, that reveals more along the lines of what's in you.
More than alcohol.
Yeah, if you slam your finger with a hammer, like my son right now, he's got a cut right on the end of his finger. It's because he put a staple through it first off, and then he hit it with a hammer.
Yeah.
And so, it's not exactly bragging for him, but the realization that I asked him, "Did you curse? Did you feel like cursing?" Because to me, I think that reveals more about your character.
You were trying to expose his nakedness by asking if he felt like cursing.
Is that shameful?
That is. You don't have to. You protect that. If it didn't come out, that's good enough. But yeah, I think we all have our weaknesses. Yeah. I definitely have struggled with a temper through my life. So it's not a matter of that. It just, some things you struggle with, some things you don't. But I would say that you can curse your kids in other ways. You don't have to. You can do it with foul language, but you can also just do it with the things you say to them. I think we should wrestle with the idea of whether Canaan ended up this way because of this curse. Mm-hmm. Like, how many people turn out to be terrible people because they are told that they are their whole lives?
Yeah.
So there's a sense in which there could be a self-fulfilling prophecy as well that we could learn from. And that would require us to see Noah as making a bad decision here. And, I told you the history of interpretation, both Jewish and Christian, has generally defended him. But I think you've persuaded me to consider not defending him.
The other thing is, this might be way late in the game, but how does he even know about Canaan?
Well, that's a good question. But as you said, it takes time to plant a vineyard and do all this. I'm guessing this is quite a ways later. Yeah, that's the one place I push against the floods idea, that he's having some PTSD and getting drunk, because I'm thinking this is years and years and years later that this occurs. For him to know Canaan, at the very least, Ham has to have kids.
I mean, at the end of the chapter, that he's dead. He lived 900 years and he's dead. So that
But he did live another 350 years, so there's a lot of space there.
Yeah. I guess you could have a few kids on, huh?
Just a few. But I'm not sure he had any more kids, because the genealogy only covers Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
But Canaan, I'm just saying.
I'm saying Noah might not have had any more kids.
Yeah, Noah.
But and it doesn't tell us how long his wife lived either.
Yeah.
Just him.
Well, so her name.
That just tells me that it wasn't preserved.
Right.
Samson's mother wasn't named either. These are things, because by the time we get to the gospel, you know whose names are remembered?
Oh, yeah.
The women.
Oh, yeah.
So things change.
Mary, Ruth.
They progress. Yep.
Rahab.
But that's good advice that you give to parents, not to curse their children. And of course, we would mean foul language, because that's always aggressive. But there are other quite plain spoken things you could say that would be about the equivalent.
Yeah.
Right?
Choices, allowancing. It's a tough task to parent, but serious deal.
Yeah, I don't know how other people feel. I'm not afraid to tell my kids if they have embarrassed me or done something that I find to be shameful. But I feel like with that always has to come my belief in them, that this doesn't define them, that they just need to make another choice, that I believe in them and that I still love them. Yeah. So I could be wrong in that. When my kids go to therapy,
Tell us about your dad.
they'll tell me about how terrible a human being I was and how they're riddled with all kinds of anxieties because of me. I'm doing my best.
My dad was a preacher. And
Yeah. Well, thank you, Minister Joe. But we thank you for joining us again. Obviously, these are really important texts, so we're going very slow. And not as slow as God, though. He took thousands of years to write these. So we get a little bit of a pass, right, Minister Joe?
Yeah, a little bit.
Any final words?
Keep on with it. Don't give up. Love your kids. Love your neighbor. Love God. And honor him.
And if you see a rainbow, say a prayer.
Don't look for the gold. Look for God.
That's right. Be thankful that he keeps remembering this promise.
Yes.
Yeah. And remember it when somebody does something wicked that you'd like to see punished. It's a good time to remember this promise as well.